All right, there we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Rethinking Legal Ops. We're back after a very nice summer break and so excited to be back and have our amazing guest with us. Todd Smithline could not have restarted doing episodes of Rethinking Legal Ops in a better way. And just as quick introductions, I am your host, Aishwarya. Rethinking Legal Ops is a place where we have forward-thinking conversations about how the integration of law and technology are changing the practice of law and opening it up even to non-lawyers. And today we have with us Todd Smithline. He is the CEO of Bonterms. They're doing really game-changing work, which I'll let him talk about in just a moment. And he's also teaching at UC Berkeley, which is how I originally know him. He teaches a very interesting class called Video Game Law. So, Todd, over to you. Do you want to quickly tell us about what you're doing with Bonterms? And again, very happy to have you here.
Yeah, Shwara, thanks for having me. It's great to see you and to be participating in this with you. And congratulations on what you've been doing at Berkeley. And I know you're moving towards completion over there, and also with a very advanced degree, and also with what you're doing at Speed Legal. So it's great to be with you. And thank you very much for having me join. So. What are we doing at Bonterms? We are trying to solve a fundamental problem that exists right now between enterprise vendors and customers, and particularly around enterprise SaaS, which is where we're starting. So just to back up a little bit, I've been in the legal side of enterprise software and enterprise SaaS for 30 years now, and as you mentioned, for about the last, I think this will be my 13th year, I've been also teaching on these topics at Berkeley Law School. Actually, as you mentioned, I teach video game law, but as part of that, we do talk about IP development agreements and negotiation and those sorts of things. But in my full-time practice up until last September, I was working with really a great list of leading enterprise software, then enterprise SaaS, and internet companies, and how they relate to each other, how these companies relate to their customers, how they relate to their partners, and their developer ecosystems. And before that, I was in-house at an enterprise software company called Marimba that we took public. So it's first counsel, then general counsel, public company general counsel. And before that, I started my career at Latham & Watkins and Gunderson Detmer, and now you know everything I've ever done in my life. Okay, so what's the problem we're solving at Bonterms? When an enterprise customer meets an enterprise vendor, and the customer is going to entrust that vendor with their data, whether it's their employee data or their customer data, or just their internal data, the customer has some very legitimate concerns about the relationship. The vendor will be processing the data. The customer is concerned about data breach. The customer is concerned about liability for compliance. So both in the current era of GDPR and CCPA and CPRA, which is our new California law coming into effect, and we have a federal law on the horizon. We have Utah and Colorado, Virginia, other states legislating. Each of the party, the customer or the controller or the business as we call them, and on the other side, the vendor or the processor or the service provider as we call them, each of these parties has an independent legal obligation, as you know, around compliance, right? Around the transfer of that data from the customer to that vendor and the processing done by the vendor. So again, as I said, there are a couple of very legitimate concerns these customers have when they're engaging with these enterprise SaaS vendors. They need to understand what's happening with their data. They need to understand what happens in the event that there's a data breach. And they need to meet their compliance obligations. And on the other side, the vendor also has to meet compliance obligations, right? So there's been a lot of pressure put on this commercial negotiation between vendors and customers because of these data issues. Yet at the same time, we've really been conducting that negotiation the same way for my entire career, and really probably dating back to the advent of commercial contracts, which is that one side prepares a contract, they tend to prepare it in a way that's unilaterally favorable for them. If they anticipate, if they think of the other party to the agreement at all, they do it in a somewhat modest or minimal way, and they send that contract over. And the other side now needs to read this contract, and they need to figure out how to adjust it so their needs are also met. If you're a vendor getting a customer contract, you also have to adjust it so it properly reflects your product and your data flows. And so this is a terribly inefficient situation, especially given that SaaS is defined as a single application serving multiple users, and every customer of a SaaS service, I don't care if it's Salesforce, I don't care if it's Workday, Atlassian, whatever that service is getting the exact same service, right? They may be getting a TAM, they may be getting a slightly different SLA, they may be getting a higher level of storage or compute, but the bottom line is it's the exact same service everybody else gets. And yet somehow it's 2022 and we're running around crafting bespoke contracts, right, between customers and vendors. Customers of a certain size or larger all want to have this conversation. So long way of explaining what we're doing. What we're doing is stepping back and looking at that and saying, is there a better way? And the way you get there is ask, well, what are we trying to accomplish, right? What we're trying to accomplish is an agreement that meets the fundamental needs of both parties, is an agreement that allows the customer to know what's happening with their data, what's going to happen if there's an issue with the data, also what's going to happen if there's an issue with the product, what's going to happen on renewal, what's going to happen with pricing, what's going to happen with support and SLA. On the other side, the vendor needs to know, what are my liabilities, what are my obligations, how am I meeting compliance? And so that's not a terribly complicated conversation. We know how to do this. Almost every single vendor has their own contract, and frankly, most large customers have their own contracts too. It's not terribly mysterious what needs to be in these contracts. It's just that we are paying a price collectively as an industry because of the fact that each vendor and each customer has their own contract. So the idea, which is as simple to articulate as it is difficult to pull off, is to say, what if we just come together as a community of vendors and customers and in-house lawyers and law firm lawyers and draft some standard agreements that are balanced between the two parties that both parties can use. And that's what we're doing at Bonterms. We have brought to market an NDA, mutual NDA, cloud terms, which you use to create a cloud agreement, an SLA, a service level agreement, and soon a data protection addendum, a DPA, and next after that will be a PSA, professional services agreement. So we have a committee, 50 lawyers, help us draft these forms, help us vet these forms. It's a really extensive deep dive process. It's a very collaborative process. And the best part is that we give the forms away for free. They're open source and anyone's free to use them. So that was a very long, thank you for allowing me to give a very long answer to a very short question, but that's the bottom line. That's what we're doing at Bonterms. We're doing standard agreements for the enterprise.
That's fantastic. And I think what you're doing is truly game changing because of all the reasons that you already listed, but because there are 50 attorneys, expert attorneys, the last time we met, you also said, maybe some students, maybe some of your former students who are now practicing in other countries. So it's just such a great resource, and that's just available for free. So I think that's fantastic. And, it was just great to, hear you talk about data privacy issues because it's such a complicated topic. You could talk about it for an entire semester, but you sort of painted a very clear picture of the different laws that exist. So I'm very, very excited to read the DPA and the MSA from Bonterms, and I really think that especially for SMEs or companies that are just beginning to start out, it could be absolutely game changing, and I cannot wait for more adoption of standard agreements at the enterprise level as well. A movement which has already started. We've seen some work from like PwC, similar work from like one NDA and then Bonterms. So it's just amazing to see that type of work happening. So when you say standard agreements, Todd, how do they differ or how similar are they to templates?
Yeah, great question. And let me pick up on a few things you said, because you said a number of interesting things there. So first, let's start with standard agreements. So we define standard agreements as agreements that are balanced. That means they take into account both parties. They're free to use. They're implemented by covered page. So this is really important. So if you're familiar with the IAB terms, which are how we buy and sell online internet advertising, or the ISDA terms, which are how derivatives are traded. The California Residential Purchase Agreement, the Apache 2.0 open source license. These are agreements that exist. I like to say they exist in time and space. So Bonterms standard agreements available for free on bonterms.com. You can find them on GitHub as well. We make them available in HTML, and we make them available in PDF, but we don't make them available in Word. And the reason is we believe a true standard agreement is standard. It doesn't change. But that doesn't mean you can't implement it and make any changes you like for your transaction. So the agreement stays the same, but for your transaction, we have a cover page, and on the cover page, you put in the key variables for your relationship. So for the NDA, for example, the purpose, the effective date, when does this thing start, the term, how long does it last, the confidentiality period is going to be 3 years, 5 years, or perpetual, the governing law in the courts, right? So the NDA was designed with those variables in mind. We call them key terms. They're all in bold, they're all in blue, and you implement them on a cover page. But we also have on that cover page, and you can find all of this on Bonterms, and you can find Word documents of the cover pages, and you're free to do anything you like with those resources. You'll find a row called additional terms, which is quite important. So what that means is that you can change anything you want in the NDA or in the cloud terms, but you do it by reference. So let's say you review our NDA and you say, hey, this is a great NDA, but I need a residual clause for my transaction. Or we have a clause in the NDA that says that you can disclose information if required to by law. Some companies will say, well, that's okay, but if you're subpoenaed, you better give me 30-day notice before you hand anything over. So in the NDA, we call it additional changes, and in the cloud terms and in the SLA, we call it additional terms, but there's a row, and that's where you put in the change, and then that supersedes what's in the agreement. So what's happening is that parties are simply exchanging these cover pages. Our motto is review once, use many. So once you've reviewed the underlying agreement and created your cover page, it's like an issues list. This is all you now have to discuss and negotiate. So as I said, for us, a standard agreement, to answer your question, is balanced, it's free to use, it's implemented by cover page and only by cover page, not by red lines, not by comment bubbles. In our case, it's committee validated. When we first started, I think we had about 30 companies on the committee, and I can answer the question, how long does it take 30 lawyers to draft a single page NDA? And the answer is 3 months, and that's not bad. The cloud terms took about 6 months, 4 subcommittees, one on risk, one on data, one on general terms and design. DPAs, the committee is now 50 overall, including, as you mentioned, a number of LLMs and students of mine from Berkeley. Really like to include students in this process. I think it's a great opportunity for them to meet others and also work collaboratively and see how lawyers can work collaboratively. But in our case, a standard agreement is also one that's vetted by a committee. So as I mentioned, we're working on the DPA. We've been at it for months. We have a subset of our larger 50-person committee, which is 20 lawyers, 20 privacy lawyers. We have 6 major law firms. We have some very, very large customers, some very, very large vendors. You can look at the list. It's all public on our committee page. These people are all volunteers. They just help us create the best forms we possibly can. And so that's what we mean by standard agreements. Now, you mentioned there are other projects. There's a broader movement. So we are really excited about this. We're excited about the notion that collectively as a community, we can do some actual innovation here for legal. Right? We can introduce a tool that's available to everybody to really up-level how they're doing these contracts and put them on a much more equal playing field with each other. But it's not just small companies who are interested. There is this sort of sense that it's the SMBs coming up that are going to be interested, and they are. They're very interested. But I'll tell you something. I just got back from ProcureCon, meeting with some of the very largest corporations in the world. They're also very interested. They're interested for a different reason. They have tremendous market power. They have tremendous leverage. They have the ability to use their own form, but a lot of their own forms, on average, I went around taking notes. I asked a few questions. One was, how long is your form? And the next one was, how long does it take you to get a deal done? So they're sending out 50-page agreements. It's taking them 3 months to get these things done. So that's not efficient for them either. And there's certainly a decent percentage of definitely of the NDAs, if not all of them, and of these cloud agreements that they'd be more than happy to get down a set of standard terms. And so what we're seeing them do is they have their cover pages. And so maybe if the average cover page has 5 or 6 things, theirs have 10 or 12, and they're attaching their security policies and their DPAs, but they're still able to address everything they care about. And in fact, I would contend it's a better result. And the reason, or could be a better result, and the reason is that you're not lost in red lines and comment bubbles. So you're not having a meta conversation. You're not having to have conversation, whether 2 contracts professionals or 2 lawyers or whatever, whoever's having this conversation about what does the contract say. Instead, you're just having a conversation about what are you doing with my data? How are we meeting compliance? What is the scope of the indemnity, the limitation of liability, the things we really care about? So to me, what we're doing is focusing those conversations. Last thing I'll say is how we're different than some of the other standards projects. Well, first, the folks is, like I said, I've been sat here for 30 years doing this. So we have, this is a kind of inside out thing. We're here in beautiful downtown San Francisco on a gorgeous day. And so, we're trying to do this, legitimately from within this sort of this community. The second thing I would say is that we are taking this notion of standards very seriously. And so, as I mentioned, we only make the Bonterms standard agreements available in PDF and HTML. There are some folks out there who have agreements they call standards, but they let you access them in Word. That's not really standard. That's just another template. Okay, so that's the difference. One NDA, many people are familiar with. They've been terrific. They've been absolute pioneers of standardization. Big fans of what they've done with their NDA. They don't have a cloud agreement, but we're big fans of their NDA. We have one slight difference with them as well, which is that their agreements have variables, but they don't have that row for additional terms or changes. So basically, it's kind of a take it or leave it. That works for a lot of folks in a lot of cases, but it isn't going to work for everybody in every case. And philosophically, we're just a little different here, where we say we don't think you should have to give up the benefits of standardization just because you need to make a change. Let me give you an example. A lot of financial services companies define affiliate as 30%, not 50%. So they're just going to have to address this, or they cannot use the agreement. There's no option for them, right? So our approach is to say, we think we have good words. We hope we have the best words, but we know that 2 sophisticated parties are going to need to implement this in a way that meets their particular needs. And so, like I said, slight difference there. But in general, I would say it's terrific that this is happening. And I think it really is. We see it's happening. I mean, we know it's happening. We get the emails, we get the letters, we talk to people all day long who are implementing. So it's exciting that we're actually doing some real innovation here, and we're doing innovation at the level of the work, of the words, of the substance. Right? This is not software. This is not AI. This is not robots. This is not better process. This is not better alerts. This is not better tracking. We're actually starting at the very beginning, and before people engage with those technologies, which are great. By the way, if you really want to use your CLM and put that thing on Rails, start with the standard agreement, and you will fly through that process. So that's what we mean by standard agreements.
Yeah, absolutely. Cannot agree more. And one of the things that really stood out to me when you're talking about your standard agreements is that you can't really, you can add terms and customize it if you like, but then you cannot really tweak the standard too much. And when you're negotiating, I'm imagining that you're just already starting from a place of just like mutual trust between both parties. Like you cannot be adding like sneaky details and things like that. So that's actually one of my favorite things about just standard agreement. Also, having been the intern doing like circle ups, having to read red lines and things like that and prepare memos on them, that is an aspect that I truly appreciate. And the other thing is that you've got a pretty diverse committee from what I've seen on your website, and what's my favorite part about it is also that there's some LLM students. As a former LLM, Berkeley LLM myself, I think that apart from also giving the students that opportunity, it adds this international flavor to documents, because these are attorneys, from all over the world, like practicing attorneys, some with like 10, 15 years of experience. So I got very excited when I saw Bonterms, and I do genuinely think that starting at the place, something very important that you just said, starting right at the beginning with words, with just the base of the contract, where every business relationship begins, where every negotiation begins before you get to technology. Fixing that first is so much is so important in conjunction with then using the right tech tools. And I want to unpack what you said towards the end. If you want to get the most out of your CLM or your other legal tech tools, adopting a good standard is so important. Can you expand upon that a little bit and tell us about how standard agreements, how do they help people get most out of their legal tech tools in terms
I
of
will, but I want to say something I really care about more first, which is teaching and your comment about LLMs and students, because in addition to teaching the fall class, I teach the summer LLM class at Berkeley. And this comment you make about students having a different perspective, I just want to add two thoughts there. One is, it's wonderful when we're having the summer class and often the fall class with foreign students too, because you can ask the question, which is, okay, well, you're in a civil law system. How do you deal with substantial similarity or this issue in copyright? How does the court deal with fact finding? And as you well know, in some countries we have the judicial branch actually does the fact finding, as opposed to here where we have an adversarial process, right? And so that's exciting for us. That's exciting for me, and I just want to mention that as an instructor, but also as for us here at Bonterms to have that perspective. The other thing I will say about the students, of course, is that unlike some of us who've been doing this a while, they're operating in a different world than we operated in, and they're very attuned to innovation and things like this. They're very excited to adopt this. They if they see a better approach, they don't need to bother with, wait, what was this old approach? This is clearly better. And so we love having that enthusiasm and energy and having this next generation of professionals be with us on this journey. Okay, let me come back to your question about CLMs. That's what we're here to talk about, and standard agreements. So, what is a CLM? It's a tool to help you configure a document and move it through an internal approval process, and hopefully help you sum up with a negotiation, get it signed, get it stored, and know what you did. So the great thing about Bonterms is the core element of Bonterms is this cover page, right? So every CLM on earth can create a cover page. In fact, they're all designed to create a document. We've just totally simplified the thing, because instead of the system having to understand every one of these systems is designed for infinitely complex contracts, right? And they're all designed to have to deal with any kind of contract at all. The beautiful thing about standard agreements is it's all structured data, right? So if you know what the topic is that you're discussing, if you know what the fields are about, you can do really interesting and helpful things for that user in terms of having them fill in that information. And so we've been working with CLMs some have just implemented Bonterms themselves, and we really love that. And some have come to us and we're working with them together. But we've been working with them on how do we refine those flows to get like this really awesome experience. And we have something on the website called an additional terms toolkit, which is basically all the ways we see people changing the agreements, and then we put it in a standard format, and then we give that back out. That you can find in Word, and that's under what we call CC0, no copyright, so have at it. They're just examples, but yeah. So I think if you've got a CLM, you can easily leverage that, and like I said, you can really put this thing on rails, but the system doesn't have to figure out with our agreement, is this an indemnity? Am I giving indemnity or receiving indemnity? Is this green, yellow, red? Is this 1 through 10? Like all of this computing that's gone into trying to read these agreements and understand what they say, we kind of skip that step. I should mention at Bonterms, all of our agreements are free. It's all open source. We're not a law firm. We do not provide legal services. We don't provide any kind of services. Chris Walker, who you might have seen at the very beginning, pop in and pop out, is our head of product. We are building a cloud service, and that service will help users and recipients of Bonterms. And it's going to be a totally unique workflow. It's not going to look anything like a CLM. It's in development. It will be totally optional, and like any other product, we'll probably start with people being access all or most of it without even paying. But that's our. People often ask, well, what's the revenue model? You're giving the forms away for free. Mm-hmm. So we are venture funded. We're backed by XYZ Capital here in San Francisco and the law firm of Wilson Sonsini. And but that's ultimately what we're doing here. We are going to have an optional cloud product that people can use that will be, again, designed only to do Bonterms agreements. So we've kind of doubled down on doubling down over here. We really believe in standard agreements.
That's great. And you're mentioning really important things about just like the integration with, whether that's like, the Bonterms like cloud platform or just any other legal tech tool. In 2022, it's always been important in my opinion, but how important are data insights for, lawyers and businesses from the contracts that they're executing?
Well, it's critical because let's come back to where we started the conversation, which is that there's something important happening in these agreements right now. There's something that both parties really care about, which is that data is being transferred and processed. And as I mentioned, and as you know, each party to the agreement has this independent compliance obligation, right? So not only do they want to know for practical reasons, and not only do they want to know in the event there's a data breach or misuse of the data, but each has an independent legal obligation. There's language they have to put into that contract, right, in order to meet their own compliance obligations. And then that's before you even get to the practical information. When does this start? When does this end? How much am I paying? Does it auto renew? What's my SLA? So with standard agreements with structured data, we are able to really, sorry, I was just gonna see if I actually even could show you this. We are able to allow people to very quickly, this is an example cover page, it's all structured data, right? So if you work with a CLM or other system, you're able to very quickly see the exact fields of information that you care about. But in general, to answer your question, I think the content of these contracts is very important. I think this is why this process is so difficult. I think that the stakes have really risen. And I think that that's why people are having the long and difficult negotiations they are. And that's why I think there's such a great opportunity here. I want to come back to one other thing you said, which was about mutual trust. So one thing that's been interesting for us in talking to users of the forms that comes up almost every time is people say, well, we like it because it's standard and it's faster, but we really like the fact that it's less acrimonious to have these conversations. And we kind of knew that was going to happen, but it's been really interesting and frankly rewarding to hear people say, oh yeah, well, what's happening is that we're able to start the conversation in a different way, in a way that's really, much more mutual and with much more goodwill. It's interesting if you think about the standard SaaS contract agreement workflow. A vendor finds a customer, they run a trial, they get through a successful trial, they get through a successful security check, the customer identifies budget, like everything is ready to go. And then we sort of drop it over this cliff, and just totally, destroy all the goodwill in that relationship through the legal process. And then there's this process where we come back together and go to deployment, right? I mean, it makes no sense. Why are we going to battle stations? You're my customer. What is this all about, really? Who thinks this is a great way to start any kind of relationship, whether you're the customer or the vendor? It makes no sense. So one of the things people are telling us, which is great to hear, which is that, well, we like starting with a standard because we didn't write it and they didn't write it. And it seems pretty good and pretty neutral and a great place to start. And then we can just talk about the stuff we care about, but it's not me criticizing your form or you're saying we're not standard. Like that whole level of kind of dialogue that frankly was probably never really all that helpful or legitimate to begin with just drops away. In fact, both parties can criticize it. Neither of you wrote it. It's like the perfect thing, and then you just implement it the way you want to. And so, I just wanted to pick up on your saying that because I do think it's a kind of underrated factor in this, is that people are tired of the acrimony and they don't want to go to work every day and have to have negative conversation after negative conversation after negative conversation. And so it's some of those very people who are reaching out to us and saying, I want to use this. I want to try using this. It's going to help my day. And I'm like, yeah, that's great.
I love that. And just going off of that, just helping maybe lawyers or, just other professionals have an overall better experience doing business or, closing transactions. How do you think standard agreements help lawyers do what they do better? And the second part is, something that I'm personally very passionate about. When I was going to law school and thinking about, one day becoming a lawyer, I never saw myself just being the lawyer that I saw on TV or, what was, like the more traditional form. I sort of saw the future of law, and this is taught to me by professors, as well as, like legal innovators or legal solutions engineers, something like that. How do you think standard agreements are redefining just the practice of law in general in that regard?
Well, so our motto at Bonterms is review once, use many, and the review is by a lawyer. And all over our website and everything we say is have your lawyer review this. What we think we're doing is allowing the lawyers to focus on the conversation they really want to have. So, I keep coming back to this, and I just came back from ProcureCon, and you run around and you ask people, what do you care about? And they say to me, Todd, all we care about is what's going on with the data and compliance. Like, that's it. And this is really writ large what people care about today. So if I'm a lawyer or a contracts professional and I'm tasked with getting a deal done, and I'm tasked with making sure that we know the data story and the compliance story, isn't it nice for me not to have to go in and rewrite the warranty language or the indemnity language around notice, control, and cooperation? I might change what's a covered claim for the customer or the provider, but thank you very much. I don't have to go through and rewrite the basic operational language. As long as I thought it was good. And by the way, if I look at it and I think you missed a prong, I just add the prong, right? And so what I think is happening is that, by the way, I don't think we missed a prong, but opinions may vary. But what I think it allows the lawyer to do is say, okay, I'm going to lawyer this. I'm just going to talk about GDPR. I'm going to talk about, are you a controller or a processor for this element of the data? I'm going to talk about what is the proper scope of the indemnity. Should we include gross negligence or not? I'm going to be a lawyer, and have a conversation about a legal issue. What I'm not going to be is a project manager. What I'm not going to be is a midnight reader. All these things we're asking lawyers to be. And so I think I'm a lawyer. I would not be I love being a lawyer. I teach law. I'm like maybe one of the few people who doesn't go on LinkedIn and say, I escaped former lawyer. I'm a lawyer. I'm a proud lawyer, and I've been a great career for me. It's been a wonderful career for me. And frankly, if you look at that committee, it's my former students, my former clients, my former employees. There's some combination, at least, that first 20, 30 folks on that committee were. And what I think is this is very pro-lawyer. People say to me, well, how are lawyers going to feel about it? I say, well, I got 6 law firms on the committee, and I've got 40 other lawyers, and they love it because they know what it means to be a lawyer. They're not confused about what the lawyer's supposed to do. They love this notion that we're going to tee up a cover page with the things they need to deal with. They'll review the whole thing first. They all do, which is great. They set the changes they want to make. But once they've done that, they don't have to do it again because the agreement doesn't change, right? So they can really just say, show me the deviations. If they want to change anything on my cover page that I prepared, come to me and I'll lawyer that. But that's it, right? And so that allows for tremendous efficiencies within those systems, right? Because now the people implementing it only have to go back to counsel if something deviates, right? And when it does deviate, it's not a thing where they're like, send me the red line and I got to spend 30 minutes reading it and I have to figure out what are the 4 clauses where all this relates. They don't have to do any of that stuff. They just look at the deviation and say, can I agree to that or not? And if not, why not? So I think it's very pro-lawyer. I think it helps lawyers. I think it allows lawyers to do what lawyers want to do, which is be lawyers and focus on legal issues. And so, I think, and by the way, I think this is why people are helping us, and not everybody's going to use the forms, or maybe they'll use them for this but not that, or maybe they'll wait and use them tomorrow, but enough are using them today. And I would say, even for the folks who haven't deployed them yet, the support we're getting is incredible. People are saying, yeah, this is cool, we like this. And And even, you know, for just to have a standard out there, you know, that you could reasonably describe as a standard, you know, so maybe you're negotiating your own deal and there's some wackadoodle thing they're doing in the warranty. It's nice to be able to pull up bond terms and say, well, I don't see it there, or that's not how they dealt with it, or how about we look at how they dealt with it. Other ways we see people deploying the cloud terms, the bigger companies might say, look, I'm going to use bond terms when I'm being asked to move off my own paper, right? Or another problem we're solving is a trial. So it's very common now, especially with AI type products, but really with any kind of SaaS product that does any processing on the data, that the customer says, I cannot give you dummy data. I cannot figure out if your product works for me with dummy data. I need to run live data. So it's really nice in those circumstances to be able to say, okay, we're just going to do the trial on bond terms. Look, later, will they really go back and redo it? Maybe, maybe not, but at least we got them to the trial, right? Because it's pre-built and it's there and it works for everybody. And it has warranty, it has indemnity, it has reservation of right, it has all the stuff you need, right? And so you can just sort of say, let's just do the trial on bond terms and then we can come back. So yeah, there are lots of different ways we're finding that, you know, besides just using them, which a lot of people are, but we're finding other ways people are finding the forms useful. And I'm thrilled that I just this morning it happened again. I started the day with a LinkedIn message from somebody saying thank you. It started with a thank you. You know, we are using your forms and they're helping. And so yeah, I think there are a lot of different ways standard agreements can help lawyers.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm also seeing use cases for non-lawyers, like people who just don't know how to draft a document and don't want to pay for outside counsel for things like, perhaps for more complex documents they would, but something like an NDA that they're just like looking to attach, with a deal they're sending out, or, like maybe like a proposal they're sending out,
Yeah.
could be very, very useful for them, because, lawyers are not cheap to get, especially if you're like a small or medium-sized entity. You probably want to, someone described this to me really nicely. I mean, you probably want to have some sort of a balance where for your small, like lower stakes task, you probably don't want to have to go to your outside counsel. So maybe you can reduce your outside counsel cost by 20 to 30% by, some automation, standard agreements or like templates, whatever you're most comfortable using. And then you still get that, you still free up some money to be able to see your outside counsel for actually having that conversation with the other party, or like negotiating that deal for you. So I love that. I want to ask you, Todd, a
I
bit
want to
more.
just add one comment on that though. We definitely, and we say this clearly, have a lawyer look at this, right? This is not a substitute for lawyer legal services. I would say to the folks who are budget constrained, though, send bond terms over to your law firm and have them review it once, have them create one cover page for you. And then you only need to show it to them again if people are changing the cover page. And we're seeing law firms, you recommend this out to their clients. Say, look, just start on bond terms and then come back to us if you really need your own form. So I do want to be careful though that we're not out in market for folks who don't have lawyers. It's really not what these forms are designed for. These forms are designed for lawyers to look at them, assess whether they're going to work in a particular circumstance, and give that advice. But that said, to your point, once this review once use many. So once that's happened, go for it, right? And then you only need to get legal review of those deviations. But it's always an important point for me to make, because I don't want there to be a misunderstanding of what we're trying to accomplish here. We are really trying to give folks a standardized way to do a complex transaction, but what we are not trying to do is give them a way to kind of just do it blind.
Oh yeah, because that is dangerous, and
yeah, it's not good for them, it's not good for anybody. And but to your point, this is what everybody wants. They want to categorize their legal tasks. So, start with your lawyer, have them review bond terms, have them tell you if it works for you, have them give you a cover page that works for your circumstance, whether you're buying or selling, and then great, then you're off to the races.
Yep. Absolutely. And Todd, what do you think about some of the limitations with standardization itself? Because in my mind, I see some contracts that could be more easily standardized than others, like NDAs or DPAs, even MSAs could be some of them. But where do we balance this artisanal, like bespoke approach with
Yeah.
standardization?
Well, I have a long list of agreements that people in various industries certainly believe could be standardized. I mean, if we can figure out how to trade derivatives on a standard agreement, I think we can figure it out for most areas. We'll see where we go. I know that we're doing the DPA next. That's a complicated agreement. The nice thing again about our standard agreements is they're all implemented by cover page, so you can actually do the details and the changes you need to. And of course, with DPA, the annexes, right, for cross-border transfers and SECs and anything else that you have to address specifically, right. Number two, though, where do we go? And we're doing a professional services agreement next. This is very high up on everybody's list. So we already have the draft in process and under review by a subcommittee on the PSA, meeting on that next week. But what I would say is that the fundamental principles of this could really be applied very, very broadly. I think it's more like letting people. So what we're seeing happen is that once you've done it once, it like flips this little switch, and you're like, we got this really funny set of emails. So 2 weeks ago, we got an email from a small SaaS company that says, "Hey, we're using your forms and we're really excited it's going well. And when can you get the DPA?" And then we get another email yesterday saying, "Well, now we have somebody who wants to go on their own paper, and we're telling them we don't do that anymore." And I'm thinking, okay, that was really fast. You know what I mean? You did a couple deals, I don't know, 1 deal, 2 deals on Bonterms, and then you're like, that's it. Like, I'm only ever going to do it this way because I know it's possible. So to answer your question, I think what's going to happen is it's one of these things. A new connection happens, a new wire happens, and people are like, wait a minute, what was that all about that we were doing before? Because the other nice thing about a standard agreement is you get consistent results, right? So let's come back to an NDA. Think about all the energy that is spent negotiating NDAs. Yeah. There are AI systems for negotiating NDAs. There are outsourced service providers who only do NDAs. There's large companies have people, that's their job all day long. Then you flip to a standard NDA, you're like, you review it, you're like, yeah, that's a good NDA. It covers everything we need. It protects our trade secrets. It clearly defines what's confidential. It has the exceptions we need. And then you're like, well, I'll just do that and not have this bespoke, precious conversation every time. So where does this go? I think it goes wherever industries want it to go. I think it goes wherever a bunch of lawyers are willing to get together and collaborate. And so the last thing I'll say is this collaboration. Lawyers get a bad rap. We get bad raps for all kinds of things. I'll tell you what's delightful. Get a bunch of lawyers together who are really good at what they do and put a document up and say, what do we all think is the best way to draft this? What do we all think is the best way to say this? And guess what they do? They show up, they send you the red lines, they send you the comments, meeting after meeting. I've been doing this for a year now. I've got lawyers who've been on every single one of those calls. They have comments every single time. They're volunteering this. They care. They like what they do. They want to share their expertise. They also want to hear from others. They love hearing, oh, is that how you do it? Oh, is that what you think that means? It's, and so given we don't do this enough. Frankly, the law schools don't do this enough. The industry definitely doesn't do this. The bar associations, we don't bring lawyers together and say, talk to each other. Have a conversation across law firms, across companies. You're not here on behalf of any client. You're not even here on behalf of customers or vendors writ large. You're here as lawyers. Let's figure this out together. And you know what happens? Just like software engineers. They're like, oh, yeah. I've got a great idea for how to do that. Look at the enterprise software stack. It's 80% open source, okay? Software engineers have quietly been collaborating with each other for the last 20 years. And the net result is that all the software on this phone and most of the software, running every system that's connecting you to me right now, and all the systems that run UC Berkeley are mostly run on open source. The engineers are way ahead of us. So we're doing this tiny little thing as lawyers and saying, hey, wait, what if we just got together, wrote some good forms and gave them away for free, And so, it's very exciting, and it's exciting to be a part of this. And I guess the last thing I would say to anybody who's listening to this, who's interested, reach out to me, reach out to one of the other standards projects, get involved. This is for you. We're just all doing this together.
Absolutely. That really resonates with me, and there, as they say, there where there's a will, there is a way. And there certainly is a lot of willingness, I think, amongst lawyers from, what you're saying and from what I've also seen, and also amongst industry players to adopt these new innovative solutions, whether that's standard agreements or like legal tech tools, CLMs, contract review, things like that. So it's a very, very exciting space to be. And my last question, just going off of the points you were making, which I am most excited to ask you, as an educator, how does law school education curriculum need to change to prepare lawyers better for this more like digital future of law?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you and I are both incredibly fortunate to be able to go to this wonderful, beautiful public university called Berkeley and do some learning together. And so I think, and just an incredible faculty over there, and doing some incredibly advanced things. So I think it's a little bit different, probably, what I'm experiencing, than maybe what a lot of the other curriculum looks like. In our class, as we do a number of very practical exercises. So we do an exercise where the students are given a current or recently litigated copyright infringement case, and divide them up and have them make arguments. And even more recently than when you attended, I do some of that almost as mock courtroom, and some of it's like, okay, you're on ESPN and you have to explain that, one of the recent cases involved an athlete's right of publicity, right? So a former wrestler. So explain this to a different audience. I will tell you, of all the students who moved through the exercise, it was the last group where I said, okay, pretend you're on ESPN, who absolutely made the best arguments of anybody, right, of the entire time. So we do an exercise where they get the complaints and they get the material. And they have to apply what they've learned around whether it's substantial similarity in copyright or the Rogers test and fair use in trademark or California 3344 right of publicity and fair use in the right. So exercises around that, but where the students actually, and also group exercises, I believe very strongly, have the students work with each other collaboratively and present collaboratively. We also do an exercise, a negotiation exercise. We divide the students up in groups of two, a publisher and a developer. We give them just a few sections, one or two sections from an agreement. I don't think you can negotiate a whole agreement effectively as an exercise. Pair them up with outside lawyers. The outside lawyers come in. Sometimes that's 30 students, 15 outside lawyers. They all show up. So these are folks from industry. They observe the students. They give them feedback. They share their own experiences, right? So, anything, it's as simple as saying, anything you can do to give the students and move them from passive to active. It's not that difficult. It is difficult as the instructor. It takes quite a bit of work, but it doesn't have to be terribly innovative or creative. It's just moving them from I'm watching a lecture or participating in a conversation to I'm active now in this thing. To me, it's as simple as that. That's how you unlock the magic. And I would say to anyone out there who's teaching or is interested in these things, the rewards are immediate and tremendous. As soon as you do an exercise, their students haven't even left the room before they're thanking you and telling you how much they love this thing. And if you're ever worried about this is like the killer app for student evals. We all get these evals, like, what is this every single semester, And it's like, oh, just give them an exercise. It's like the only thing they'll talk about, and they're going to give you 5 stars because you actually had them do something, and they apply. And also, you could sit there and I could take you through, 10 cases on substantial similarity, and you could think you really understand it, and I could think I understand it, Then I give you a hypothetical, and then you need to solve it in real time. And then talk about it, with somebody who's taking the opposing view. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, I didn't really understand what's going on in the Pac-Man case. You just didn't really, the difference between passive consumption and active participation is everything in education. And so to me, that's, and look, I don't allow computers in my class. I don't allow phones in my class. I have a printed reader. I'm very old. I'm teaching video game law. I have obviously a laptop so I can show visuals and video from the games. But no, we do this in a very old-fashioned way. I think the best technology, and I've learned this again through the pandemic, for teaching is a quiet room with good lighting and a door. That's the best technology for teaching. You wake up, you get on the bus, you start the first focus. You walk across campus, second level focus. You walk in the law school, third level focus. You get your coffee. You walk in the classroom, the door shuts. Now you're really focused. And for that hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, your job is in that room and to pay attention. So I'm a very strong believer that we're not going to solve this through whiz bang. I'm from the whiz bang world. I've been in the whiz bang world my whole career, but I think if you really want to learn, especially a complex doctrine, you need to just be in a well-lit room, close the door, look at the material, talk to each other, participate in the conversation. And to me, that's as innovative as teaching can get.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that simplicity. And what really stood out to me from what you were saying is active learning and unlocking the magic, which I think they go really hand in hand. They go together. And maybe Bonterms should host like a live contract negotiation sort of a thing at Berkeley Law.
Yeah, it's great that you suggest that. And we are going to we have all kinds of ideas. We want to bring folks together. We want to have an in-person event. We want to let people talk about how they're, we need to figure out a way to so we, as people do the cover pages, we're continually updating this additional terms toolkit I mentioned to you before. But we need to figure out ways to get people together to talk about how they're dealing with bond terms agreements, and we will do. We absolutely will do that.
Great. I will be there at the moment you announce it. Just tell me when and where.
And thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to also seeing you across the bay in the next couple of weeks. So thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much, Todd. This has been absolutely wonderful. I learned so much, and thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. We're here every Thursday right around this time with some variations, but thank you for your interest in learning more about the digital transformation of law, and we'll be here next week.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. And don't hesitate to reach out to us here at Bonterms or reach out to me on LinkedIn.